Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I hope you've all got AV and comms. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, those that have dialed in this evening for this session on AI risk and regulation as it pertains to really the use of technology in healthcare. A little bit of housekeeping first, if I may. There is a poll, or there at least there should be. If we've got our tech working, there should be a poll at the bottom of your screens for attendees. If anyone can find the poll on the bottom, if they could just jump into the chat and confirm that you can see that option, that'd be great. So we've just got a couple of poll questions really to ask attendees regarding this space. My name's Joel Melton. I am a knee surgeon based in Cambridge, and I am currently the chair of OTSIS, which is the Orthopaedic and Trauma Surgeons Indemnity Scheme. So, for those of you that don't know, we're a not-for-profit organisation, essentially run by surgeons for surgeons. So, what we aim to do is really try and acquire the best quality of medical healthcare indemnity that we can for our surgical practice, and make sure that that's also acquired at the lowest possible price point. We do that through strength in numbers. We've got 106 members currently, and we're excited to grow our offering with certain newer policies. So our raison d'etre is really to use our collective buying power to make sure that we get those quality metrics right. And we also meet regularly with the underwriters, with the brokers to ensure that we're keeping up those communication links in the interest of getting the best policies that we can. We've got some exciting new policies. I'm aware that there are some registrars and NHS only consultants who may be dialing into this. We've got coverage for those specific policies, and we're very happy to talk people through those policies if you wish. And of course, full indemnity for independent sector surgery. We've also got an exciting new logo in the top corner of the screen. So OTSIS Spine now speaks to the issue of spine surgeons who've actually struggled to acquire indemnity from some of the traditional mutual firms. And we're excited to be offering a new spine surgery indemnity product through some relationships with newer underwriters in the space. So we try and provide value added for our membership too, in the partly in the interest of reducing their risk and our risk as a collective. And webinars such as this are really exciting to host. And to that point, this evening I'm very excited to be able to introduce Dr. Hugh Harvey, who is joining us to speak to really the issue of the use of AI and tech as a medical device. Hugh's an astonishing chap who's achieved a great deal in the AI and tech space already. Managing director of Hardian Health, which is a consultancy in the AI and healthcare space. So Hugh is an ex-consultant radiologist, an academic, an entrepreneur. He's helped to bring dozens of different software and medical device to market, AI systems, and is widely published and respected in this space. Hugh, despite the fact that you're a radiologist, you are very welcome in a surgical space. Okay, so it gives me great pleasure to introduce you. I thought I would just jump in, perhaps, just to ask you a little bit about your personal journey to get to where you've got to.
Sure. Well, thank you for that intro. Yeah, no, I'm quite used to being the wolf amongst the sheep as the radiologist with the surgeons. Um, we can't do our job without you, and you can't do your job without us, I guess. It's a mutual thing. Um, my personal journey. So, yeah, I became a consultant radiologist over a decade ago, but I didn't find the coalface particularly interesting. I was much more interested in the academic side of things. So I went to the Institute of Cancer Research after my CCT to go and study computational imaging, which was what it was called before it was called AI. So I had a degree in that. And then I went back to the NHS for a bit and thought, no, I'm going to go, and this AI thing's probably got some legs. So I went to work in startup land. I worked in one startup, then co-founded a second startup. And we got one of the first regulatory approvals for a deep learning based radiology AI device in 2018. Raised money from investors, and then did that for a few years. And then I sold out and set up a consultancy because I thought other people are going to want to try to get to market. So I set up Hardian. So we are a British-based consultancy for anyone around the world who wants to get their health tech to market. So we have done a lot of different types of technologies, from things that we're going to talk about today, to radiology, to pathology, to wearables, to chatbots, to all sorts of things. You name it. If it's got AI in the title and it's medical, then we've probably had our hand in it. So that's kind
So,
of my
so,
journey to date.
so never a dull moment then.
Never a dull moment. I also sit on various sort of high level commissions. I'm on the National Commission for Regulation in the UK. I was co-chair of the Topol review, which some of you may be aware of a few years back. We looked at how we could transform the workforce using AI. So I enjoy these kind of policy things as well.
And what about your academic interest? How's that played out in what you've done before and what you do now?
So I still publish a little less often than I used to, but 2 or 3 papers a year, mainly on the regulatory science of things. So I'm an honorary fellow at the Centre of Excellence for Regulatory Science Innovation, called CERSI AI, and I'm through the University of Birmingham. And we try and publish useful things around current regulatory shifts, and as well as around the economic evidence for AI, because it's not just about the regulation, it's about, does it provide a cost benefit as well through increased productivity. So yeah, I enjoy the publication side of things.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. I'm super excited, certainly, and no doubt our attendees are too. So, what we're going to do, if that's okay with you, Hugh, is just jump straight into a little bit of your presentation. So, let's get your screen shared, and then
You
we
let
can
me
put
know
up
if
your
you can see
presentation.
that.
And then if we've probably got a good 35, 40 minutes to talk this through. So we'll come back with some Q&A at the end if that's okay, and do a wrap up and try and get done by 8ish.
Perfect. So I've got a few slides, but I've tried to make them visual because I know surgeons are visual people. And this was my lengthy title that I got given by OTSIS. But in essence, I'm just going to be talking about what you guys need to know when looking at considering purchasing AI systems in surgical practice, because they should be regulated, and hopefully you are buying regulated things. Why is anything even regulated? It's to avoid this chap, the snake oil salesman. Without regulation, you would be inundated with companies selling you stuff, and you would not know if it's snake oil or you wouldn't know if it's gold. So regulations is there to sort out the wheat from the chaff. Regulations help you decide if something is safe to use, if it will work as it is claimed, if you can trust that manufacturer or their service, that you know it meets certain standards, and particularly cybersecurity standards, which are very important these days. I'm sure you're aware that you know that feedback will be actioned. They're not just going to sell you an AI system and disappear. There needs to be a feedback loop between the vendor and the customer. And importantly in medicine, that the benefits outweigh the risks. Everything we do in medicine comes with benefits, but also with risks. And, as surgeons, you know this very well. You consent patients for the benefits and the risks every operation you do. And it's the same with any medical device, including AI. Yes, there are benefits, of course there are, but there are risks. And what regulation does is try to measure and mitigate against those risks. So we're talking about that in a bit. So people talk about regulations and they don't often mean the same thing that I'm talking about. So what I'm talking about when I talk about regulations is the rules, the laws that are in place to ensure that products meet agreed quality standards and to ensure that they're safe, trustworthy, and they work as claimed. That the manufacturer is responsible. So these are, in particular, the medical device regulations that are in place in the UK and around the world. I'm not really talking about the CQC, which have their own regulations and things like that. Or I'm not talking about the regulations in relation to cybersecurity per se. And just a short note, regulations save lives. A lot of you maybe have been around during the PIP breast implant scandal. So they were selling non-silicone based breast implants to breast surgeons. And of course, these were not regulated. They didn't meet the standards. And we all know what happened there. So regulation can save lives. And if you don't believe me, ask the people of this totally unregulated submarine. Sorry, you can't, because they're dead, because it was an unregulated submarine. So there we go. There are different types of regulations around the world and in various industries, and there is a spectrum. So some things in life are what we call self-regulated, where you just trust someone to do the best that they can. In the middle, you have audited activities. So this is when you might need to pass an exam or take a test or have an auditor come and review some technical documentation. And then there's prohibited activities. So, you're not allowed to use AI to make a likeness of someone in an extreme situation, or you're not allowed to, recreate the images of children with AI, for instance. So these are prohibited activities. These are all different types of regulation. And what they do is they standardize best practice, and best practice covers everything from safety down to decommissioning. Even when when you've stopped using the thing, how do you decommission it safely? This is very important in medicine as well, especially with AI systems. How do you uninstall them? People don't think about this. They think, oh, you're never going to delete this new product, but it's part of the regulation that you have a plan for decommissioning. So all of these things are things that software developers should be doing anyway, but in this very hyped up market, there's a rush to sell, and some of these things fall by the wayside. So regulations sort of set a standard, and you might as well use the agreed standards by which the regulators will audit you against. And the other reason why we have regulations is that obviously in medicine, we don't want to do any harm. You, as medical professionals, are all regulated by a different set of rules and laws, and so are all of the colleagues you work with. All devices, all the implements that you use in surgery are regulated devices. You cannot use your own knife, for instance, or you shouldn't be buying a drill from Black & Decker and using that in your orthopedic operations. You should be using regulated medical devices. And of course, drugs, scanners, and everything else in the hospital is regulated. So why shouldn't AI be regulated if it's going to be used in the hospital? And then you have a third layer of regulation, which is healthcare services. We're not going to talk about this, but that's like the CQC and things like that. This is the lowest risk medical device that is regulated. It's a wooden tongue depressor. And you might be thinking, why on earth is this regulated? The reason is because it needs to be sterile. If they're not sterile, they can kill babies. In intensive care, people used to use wooden tongue depressors, which were not sterile, as splints instead of this soft foam thing that you see in this picture. And babies died from weird and wonderful fungal infections growing on these wooden splints. And so you might think, well, regulations for wooden splints is overkill. It's not. It's literally saving babies' lives. So if we just extrapolate that to these really complex AI systems that we're going to talk about, of course, there's going to be some level of regulation. And I'm here to teach you, well, hopefully I've already taught you regulation is important, but you're going to know what that means and what to look for in someone who's trying to sell you a regulated product. So what kind of products are we talking about? So in surgery, it literally could be anything. It could be connected to any part of the operating theatre. It could be anything digital, essentially. So you are very likely to get AI in anesthetic machines as part of your laparoscopic stack, your diathermy probes, your interoperative dashboards, even AI to book people into theatre. You might have post-operative AI monitoring patients. So all sorts of types of AI would all need to be regulated in some shape or form. Lots of you may already have this kind of AI in the places that you work. So this is just a deterministic deep learning model, which is pretty accurate at finding fractures. Hopefully none of you would miss these fractures anyway. So the jury's out on exactly how useful these are, but maybe for the third one, this could be potentially, sorry if I go back, a slightly subtle buccal fracture there. So, and this is from a Nature paper that was published recently on AI specifically in surgery. And again, a lot of different use cases. So automated surgical scene recognition, object recognition, scene analysis, something to back up the surgeon during the procedure. At the radiology side and the preoperative setting, you've got all of these lesion detection and prognosis and prediction models. And then you might have interoperative support. So some of you might use 3D reconstructions. Some of you might be very excitable and use HoloLens and virtual reality and things like that to pre-plan. And again, all of this needs to be regulated because if they go wrong, patients could come to harm. Here's a really good example of a client of ours. They are developing interoperative AI to map out the anatomy. This is, I'm not entirely sure where this is. Looks like a gallbladder to me, but I might be wrong. To map out where to cut, can see that they've labeled here the resident is cutting too low. So this is helping guide junior surgeons on exactly where to look and where to cut, which obviously is an important thing. So what criteria mean that something needs to be regulated? So this is what the regulations say. If a developer is building software, technology, AI, whatever they want to call it, to either inform or drive any of these things, then it's a medical device. So diagnosis, prevention, prognosis, treatment, alleviation, monitoring of any medical condition, disease, injury, or disability. So pretty much anything that touches a patient is a medical device. Anything used to manage their care, make a diagnosis, treat them, monitor them is likely to be a medical device. And they need to be regulated. So they must align with the regulatory requirements for safety and effectiveness. And this is the definition in Europe. And the definition is broadly the same across the world. And just for example, I've shown here what the American regulations say. So you'll see some words here that I've already said: diagnosis, prevention, monitoring, prediction of disease on the left, and exactly the same things are kind of said in Europe. So you can't get away from regulation in any Western society at all. And the UK regulation is essentially a carbon copy of the EU regulation, except we've crossed out EU and we've put British standard in front. Even simple clinical calculators can be medical devices. So the box in PERT, this is from the MHRA, who are the UK regulators. Calculators with simple scoring and simple calculations that you can do in your head, plus, minus, times, divide, and things, may not be a medical device. But as soon as you're doing intermittent calculations, renal clearance or something like this, then it becomes a medical device. So even doing relatively simple calculations, risk scoring, or algorithmic scoring becomes a medical device. So preoperative risk scoring could be a medical device, for instance, just based on this guidance from the MHRA. And of course, there's a gray area. Some things are not a medical device, like things involved in research, things involved in pure administrative functions like coding and billing, or training and education. They're not necessarily medical devices. Then you've got the flip side, which are definitely medical devices, so clinical decision support, predictions, diagnostic measurements, all the things we've talked about. And then there's a new gray zone, which is currently expanding quite rapidly, where ambient scribes, medical transcription, kind of sits in this weird gray zone where it is administrative, but it does come with risks and it does change the way that people behave and act around patients. So that is still up for debate at the moment. Enhancing the electronic health records, it really will depend on how much you're enhancing them and what you're doing. Are you running calculations or predictions, in which case you are. Are you just organizing data and making it findable? Maybe not a medical device. So this is gray zone. And then automated patient communication. So some companies offer to send out lay language letters based on your clinic notes. So they translate your clinic note into lay language, send it out to the patient. But again, that's important that that language is correct and it's not hallucinating and telling the patient gibberish. So in that kind of current grey zone, and I sit on lots of committees where we talk about these matters, and we're going to come down one side or the other very shortly on some of these topics. So once a vendor has identified whether something is a medical device or not, and no surprise that most things are going to be medical devices, they have to do something called the intended use. They have to tell people what they intend their device to do. And it's not just saying this device is to be used in surgery. They have to do all of these legally required things. And the bottom one is super important. It's the risk class of the device. The riskier something is, the more evidence needs to be provided that it is safe and effective, and with AI, cyber secure. So we'll talk about risk classification in a second. And intended use has to really be granular as to who it's for, what kind of patients, what state of disease, and exactly what it is doing. Is it providing information? Is it aiding diagnosis? What is it doing? So the intended use is super important. And I labor this point because I see a lot of vendors of AI systems telling the regulators, oh, the intended use is just to do this little thing. And then they sell it as this all singing, all dancing product to the customers who are unsuspecting. So always check. If a product is regulated, check the intended use matches what the marketing people are telling you. because you may find the intended use is relatively limited. Uh, it's not all magic and singing and dancing like the marketing people are telling you. So regulations are important. I'm just going to briefly cover what the regulatory frameworks are, what you should be aware of, and how you check a vendor has complied with these regulations, which is the whole point of the session. So there are various regulators around the world, but they all enforce the medical device regulations in their jurisdiction. So in the UK, the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, is the one that governs us. In the EU, you have the European Medicines Agency. In the USA, you have the Food and Drugs Agency. And there are others in every single industrialized country. And a medical device can only be sold in the jurisdiction that it has approval in. So if you get approval in America, you can't sell it anywhere outside America. If you get approval in the UK, you can't sell anywhere outside of the UK. So manufacturers have to get multiple regulatory clearances around the world. So make sure, the first thing is when someone says they got regulatory clearance, make sure they got clearance for the UK. Now, they can have two clearances. They can have a UK CA mark, which is a sign of UK conformity, or we also accept the European CE mark. I'm not going into a bit more detail on that. But you can't just have something that's cleared in Canada that hasn't been cleared in Europe and the UK. That's not allowed to be used here. And just to note that even though the regulators are different, the regulations themselves are largely the same. These are the frameworks that apply to the UK, the EU, and the USA. Just to show that the European Union has the AI Act, which comes into force or has started coming into force already. We don't have the AI Act here in the UK, so there's not that extra layer of, but by and large, everyone has the same regulatory frameworks. Now we'll move on to risk classification. So I mentioned that the higher the risk something is, then the higher the evidence burden. There are three classes of medical device to know about. Class 1, this is low risk. This might be something like a mental health support chatbot. It's not diagnosing, it's not triaging, it's providing mental health support. It's not claiming to cure depression, it's just providing counseling and guidance. That is relatively low risk. And for low risk class 1 devices, they don't need to be audited by a regulator. You just can self-certify. So if you remember at the start of the talk, I said there was some self-regulation. That's what class 1 is, it's self-regulated. Class 2 is medium risk. This is when you get involved, a product gets involved in informing or driving the management of a patient. So this is all the radiology stuff, AI detecting of lung nodules, triaging of mental health services, interoperative AI guidance. This will all be medium risk, class 2A and 2B. These do need to be audited by an independent professional body. And then you have class 3. So these are high risk, life-threatening, time-critical situations. So stroke diagnosis, AI that might influence pacemakers. And there is one AI system that is class 3 that is for looking at skin lesions. So it can triage potential melanoma or skin cancers from dermatoscopic photographs taken by users at home. So that's a high risk device because if you get a cancer diagnosis wrong, people can die. So it's based on risk. And of course, higher up the risk class, the more evidence is required. By and large, the majority of products that you will be sold are going to be class 2. And 2A and 2B are kind of interchangeable. 2B is just slightly more risky, but the audit process is the same. I'll skip that slide. You don't need to know that. Skip that bit. The next bit to know is that medical devices, once they've defined their intended use and once they've decided which jurisdiction they're going to get regulated in, they then have to show what's known as the clinical benefit. So it's all very well saying our product can do something, it's 95% accurate, but the clinical benefit might be time saving or productivity. And that needs to be meaningful and measurable because you cannot get regulatory approval unless you actually measure something that's meaningful. So it's there for a reason. And the marketing materials of that product need to match the evidence of that clinical benefit. So if someone's selling you this new, sexy, interoperative AI, that's great. But what's the clinical benefit? Is surgical post morbidity decreasing? Has that been measured? Is surgical time shortening, i.e., having shorter operations? Like, what is the meaningful clinical benefit? A lot of AI is sold on hype and hot air, and they will sell you potential clinical benefits. And what I can hope to drill in you this evening is ask, what is the clinical benefit and what is the evidence? If someone says this will save you time, great. What's the evidence on how much time is saved, for whom, and in what circumstances? If they have regulatory clearance, they will have done this exercise and shown that data to a regulator. And they should show it to you because now you're savvy enough to ask for it. Just a side note on risks. All medical devices have risks, as you know. A scalpel is risky in the wrong hands. And the developer's task is to identify all the foreseeable risks and mitigate them, but also to catch new risks as they arise and then quickly to mitigate those. And what that means is that you can also ask vendors, well, what are the risks and how have you mitigated against them? But you also have to understand that all devices have a post-market monitoring period where new risks may arise. So you have to be prepared as a customer to feed back to the vendor on new risks. And we do this with drugs through the yellow card system already. And with software, there is no kind of solid framework in place. It's direct to vendor at the moment. You can, as I understand it, fill in the yellow card for software, but I've not seen anyone do it yet. And vendors have to use a risk management framework to identify and then quantify risks. And I think it's just important that you as customers know that, yes, things can have risks, but you need to check that they've been mitigated to the best of their ability. Medical devices also need clinical evidence, and there is a scientific process to go through. It's essentially in 5 steps where you conceptualize the intended use, as we discussed. You then go on to scientific validity, which is where you might do a literature review to see who else has done something similar. What are the benchmarks for performance in that area? So let's say you were going to build AI for preoperative planning. Well, what are the benchmarks for preoperative planning? What are we aiming? What's the clinical benefit we're aiming to hit? And what is the metric, the measurement that we're going to take? Then they build their device, do proof of concept studies, do some bench testing, usability testing, make sure users can use the device safely. They understand how to use it. They know what training they need to use it safely. And they validate that device internally. And then they move on to clinical validity. So this is the clinical trial, the pilot that you guys may be involved with. And this is called external validation or clinical investigation. And then when they're on market in stage 5, they have to do their post-market surveillance and follow-up. So just to go through those steps really briefly, the scientific validity stage is to show, is there a valid association between the outputs of the technology and the target, and what evidence is available. And this helps them design their future studies and helps make sure they're building a device that actually works. Always check for this stage, because there's a lot of AI companies who've just assumed that AI is going to be good at doing something, and they haven't actually done any scientific validity to even demonstrate this or to understand what metrics they should be measuring. This happened about a decade ago with all the radiology AI products. Everyone just said, oh, AI is going to replace radiologists, but no one ever did the scientific validity to see, well, can AI even do everything that a radiologist does? And the answer demonstrably is no. But they still went ahead and built 1 million products anyway. Some have turned out to be useful, some not so much. And I think doing this exercise would have been vital at the start. Then they have to do the analytical validity, which, as I said, does it perform well in a controlled environment? Is it usable? Does it integrate with the software stack in the deployed environment? And then they do their clinical validity. So again, this is the clinical investigation, the pivotal study that they need to do. This must be written up. It usually has to have ethics approval, should be registered as a clinical trial in the clinical trials database. And they must prove that the clinical claims and the clinical benefit that they've designed meets their intended use. So that's how these companies do their studies. Once they've done that study, if the results are good and it beats state of the art, then they can get regulatory clearance through an audit. I'll just skip that one. And then they have to have post-market plans. So they need to rely on user feedback. They have to do surveillance. They have to take complaints. It's illegal for them to ignore a complaint, by the way. So there we go. So if you make a complaint, they must do it. And then they have to do post-market clinical follow-up. If they have a performance claim, let's say your AI is claiming to be 99% accurate. Is it maintaining 99% accuracy over a period of time? Um, so when you purchase a product, you need to ask, well, what are the post-market requirements? What data do you need as a vendor for us to supply to you to show that the performance is being maintained? Because we know that AI systems can drift in their performance and vary depending, its variability depending on the deployment sites and different populations. So post-market surveillance and follow-up is aligned with regulation. You should be doing this like naturally as clinicians anyway. You should be skeptical of AI until it's been proven to work in your environment. And so you need to think about, well, how are we going to collect data for the ongoing usage of the device? And the manufacturers should provide a user interface for that. It's really important that clinical follow-up, you always have like a sample of data that's ongoing. Now, this is more tricky in surgery because it's not like radiology, for instance, where you just have images coming in the whole time and you can easily get a sample. But you might need to think about subsampling and audit. And the device vendor with AI often wants to update their model. So you have to think about, well, what is the process for updating it? How does that affect me as a customer? Will there be any downtime when you're updating? How quickly can you update? Very important questions to ask. So all of that information goes into something called a CER, which is a clinical evaluation report. So that takes in all the details from every step in their process. Now, this is known in regulatory speak as the CER, the clinical evaluation report. It's not public information. This is the company's IP. This is the company's, product description and all their evidence. They don't have to make this public. Some do publish, but the majority don't. They will have to show this to the regulators. But you as a customer can ask. So I see a lot of people complaining that the regulations are not very transparent about what data has been used to train a model or what the performance of the model is. But that's not true. You can just ask the vendor. Like if a vendor comes to you saying our model is 95% accurate, you go, great, show me your clinical evaluation report. And if they can't, well, that means they don't have one, and therefore you shouldn't buy their product. So all that information is there if they have regulatory approval. You just have to ask for it. Another trend that we're seeing is something called a model fax label. So these are for sort of fixed model types. The academic community internationally has advanced this type of fact label, kind of like a nutrition label for food, where you should be able to read, all of the things. Everything I've spoken about is in here. You've got the benefits, the target population, safe use, risks, all this kind of stuff, and the performance, things like that. So this is the kind of thing that you might want to see when purchasing a product. So here's a useful checklist that I think I would recommend that you guys follow when looking at purchasing AI products. The first thing is ask, is it a medical device or not? So remember, some things are not medical devices, some things are in a gray zone, some things are definitely a medical device. Check the intended use that the vendor is claiming it's to be used for. Use your critical thinking. Does that meet the definition of a medical device? A lot of people will try and sell you stuff saying it's not a medical device when it actually is. I mean, there's a lot of snake oil going around. So just use your critical thinking and ask the vendor, is that not a medical device? And then check that if it is a medical device, is it regulatory approved in your jurisdiction? So that's the UK CE mark or a CE mark from Europe, which is accepted in the UK. Then ask, well, what is the clinical benefit, and is it clearly evidenced? Is it meaningful and measurable? And what is that evidence? Again, don't believe the marketing materials, believe in the science of it, and ask to see their clinical evaluation reports. Again, if they look wide-eyed at that suggestion, then you're probably onto a snake oil salesman. And most importantly, understand the post-market surveillance requirements. Monitoring the performance of AI costs money, takes up resource, a lot of it. So you really need to understand what is going to be required to monitor this stuff. And do not purchase an AI system that cannot be monitored because you're playing with fire. So that's my points. There's also something called the ECLAIR guidelines. Now, this was written for buying radiology AI, but to be fair, I was reading through them and I think they applied just as much for surgical AI. And they cover the 3 points that I've said, but there's a few more here. So it talks about, if you look at point five, is what are the IT infrastructure requirements? It's all very well buying a V8 engine, but if you don't have a Ferrari to put it in, it's kind of useless. You need to have the right IT infrastructure for the AI system that's coming in. And number seven is also important, which is the health economics of it. It's great, this stuff, but a lot of it is expensive, and especially if you add in the cost of post-market monitoring. So has an ROI analysis been formed? Have they got any health economic modeling to show that this is cost effective based on the improvements that the clinical benefit provides? And I see a lot of companies fall down on this, is they've gone ahead and built something and they get regulatory approval, but no one buys it because they cannot demonstrate a valid business case that the economics work out. So that's really important. And I think if you're in charge of purchasing AI systems, this should almost be number one, and it's not number seven. It's not even worth looking at if you cannot make the numbers work out. So the ECLAIR guidelines are something to look up. I think they are, as I said, for radiology, but I think they apply to any AI really. I'll share my slides after, but here's some links if any of you are interested in some of the regulatory standards and things like that. And that's it for now. So really happy to take some questions and have a chat and hear what you guys are battling with in the space.
That is fascinating. Thank you, Hugh. That's a tour de force about how we should assess products that are coming to us. And we do get all sorts of sales pitches made from all sorts of corners of the market, but that's probably quite a helpful thing for most things above and beyond AI and software. So thank you for that. Really interesting. The AI in surgery poll, if attendees wouldn't mind just popping into the chat if that AI poll has popped up for you, because it would be quite interesting to see the data about trusts that are considering AI, whether AI medical scribe tools are being used. We have got one question. So Sam's put in a question into the box about grey areas of tech and the question of what constitutes a medical device. So ambient recording is a big one. So we've had a few questions submitted prior to this event as well. Perhaps I can just try and summarize all of those into one sort of vignette. Essentially, we are aware of scenarios whereby, for example, ambient recordings being used during a consultation. And if the AI understands that you are trying to prepare a patient for a given operation with a well acknowledged and well described risk, if it knows that you should have warned about the risk of X, Y, or Z and you didn't, it may or may not add that in as part of a complete consenting process. Now, that clearly gives some protection to a practitioner because it will remember things that perhaps a human may forget or omit. But if it didn't happen, it didn't happen. So you then have a written recording which is factually incorrect. And if all it would take would for the patient to be using an ambient recording system to summarize their understanding of the proceedings, and then before you know it, you've got a bit of a hornet's nest. So, what are your thoughts about the regulation from MRHA in this particular space of ambient recording, and how to go through the risk and opportunity there?
Yeah, it's a fascinating time to be involved in this space. So I can give you two answers. I've got my personal view, and I've got the official regulator's stance currently. So my personal view is that I actually think these should be self-regulated as low-risk medical devices. I think we should ask manufacturers to go through the process of writing a very clear intended use and measuring the clinical benefits, and most importantly, mitigating those risks of hallucinations that you've talked about. I think when you're buying these systems, you should be able to ask them, well, what is your hallucination rate, and what is my recompense for when a hallucination happens? Who do I tell? How do I feed it back? All of these things. Currently, if you're unregulated, you don't have to offer any of that. You don't have to show any evidence. You don't have to do anything. Of course, savvy clients will be asking these things, but I think by forcing them into the medical device space, even at the low risk category, it gets industry thinking, and it just raises that bar slightly higher. Now you have the regulator's official stance, which is to be silent. These products have kind of caught the regulators unawares, and they don't really know where they stand. And I've been on panels and committees where these have been discussed in circles, and half the people think there should be medical devices, and half the people don't. So we're kind of at a regulatory standstill while industry is just powering ahead. So going back to my personal opinion, I always ask, I've got lots of friends who are GPs and they're using this technology in their consultations. And I say to them, does the note that you create, like if you're going to type your note or dictate your note after your consultation, does that change the management of the patient even in the future? So when you come back to look at that note, you trust what was written in that note and you will act on what was written in that note because you have trust in it. If AI writes the note, does that not also have the potential to change and affect the management of the patient? Like the example you just said, Joel. And if the answer is yes, which I think it is, then I think it should be a medical device because the human writing the note is a regulated professional. I don't see why on earth the AI should not be. So that's my kind of argument for it. To answer the written question in the poll here, it says, should they not be used at all? I wouldn't go as far as to say, should they not be used at all? I would say they should be used with wide-eyed caution. I think large language models are exceptionally good at reformatting content. I don't think they're very good at accurately doing that. So you have to check everything. You have to sort of cross every I and cross every T and dot every I when you see the output. Because, and we haven't really discussed the liability side, ultimately, you are liable if you sign off on the AI generated report. The other thing I would say is if you are using them, do make complaints and do feedback when things go wrong. And the MHRA themselves have said, please use the yellow card system for any hallucinations that you find, because without data of things going wrong, the MHRA can't act or make a decision. So if you take the time just to do a yellow card with a hallucination, the MHRA at least have some data points to show, okay, these things are risky in the real world. So they may step in. So that's my sort of waffly, rambling answer, but in a nutshell, use them with caution. For
Well,
now.
that's helpful. Thank you. Can I pick up on a couple of points you've made there? So, large language models. Okay, this is the substance of what AI is. My question is, does it depend whose AI?
Well, yes, exactly. It will. Everyone's trained on slightly different data, and they run their companies in different ways. So absolutely, it does. And an AI trained on American data is not necessarily fit for purpose within the NHS. We have a very different healthcare system. The other thing is that a lot of these companies use OpenAI or Anthropic as their back end. Like they haven't built the large language model themselves. They are just like a wrapper around the model. So they have very little control of the underlying model. It's what we call in regulatory terms software of unknown provenance. We know nothing about the actual software that's doing the task. We just know that someone has packaged it up and presented it in a nice way. And this is a very tricky problem when it comes to software regulation because you can't ask OpenAI to tell you all their trading data because they won't, because they stole it all. So it's a very tricky kind of thorny problem where I don't think there's any obvious solution to.
Okay, well, thank you for that. There was a question submitted by one of the OTSIS members prior to the event about using ChatGPT. Other large language models are available as a source of information for medical reports. So many orthopedic surgeons will be doing some medical reporting, and in the search of evidence to back up their reports, what are your thoughts on using AI in that space?
I think it's fine to like flesh out initial ideas and things, but I would not use it to fact check. And I would if it gives you any links or citations to double check every single one.
And much like there's a system for checking that there's no plagiarism in an A-level school essay, do
Yeah.
you think that there will come a time when it will be quite straightforward to do a check on AI content generated for something that is actually being presented as your own work?
No, I think it'll be near impossible. It's pretty good already. Um, there are a few giveaways, but I think, as the technology improves, it's going to become almost indistinguishable. And that's where the matter of trust, I guess, comes in. And as regulated professionals, it's on you to behave ethically. And I would say it'll be unethical to represent AI's work as your own.
Much like the A-level student. Okay, thank you. Another question that came in about the patient's use of AI. We've talked a lot about what might be presented to us or what we might use, but of course, we're forgetting the our partner in this collaborative approach. So, what happens when the patients start using AI? For example, we've got countless stories about patients coming in saying, "Well, I've Googled my symptoms or I've chat GPT'd my symptoms, and I think I've got this, and therefore, why don't you do these investigations?" Or I've had a look at my own imaging and I've run that through Grok and it says I've got this.
Yeah. I
How,
mean,
how do we enter the dialogue with patients about that?
yeah, I think I'm less worried about this because I'm old enough to remember when Google search, was invented, and people went, "Oh, we don't need lawyers and doctors and things anymore because everyone can just Google it." And all these AI systems are literally just reading the internet, which is the same thing that information that Google's got. So take it with a pinch of salt. There may be signal amongst the noise, of course, but always use your own clinical intuition and re-examine the patient and retest. Don't take anything they say at face value. Obviously, you should listen to their concerns. Part of a good consultation is not just achieving a clinical outcome, but it's making the patient feel listened to. And I think if you say, okay, I understand you've done that and you've got the information from AI, let me do my job and let me double check. I'm not so worried about that. I don't think the patients don't have the power necessarily to act on that information other than to seek a consultation with a human doctor. So I think it's fine. I think people have been googling their symptoms for 20 years now, and the world hasn't collapsed. So I think asking AI about symptoms, I'm not so fussed about.
For sure. And one of the questions, Sam, thanks for your question about the ownership and storage of sensitive data, whether that's a patient consultation or the minutes of a meeting. Clearly, some concerns there about transcription of a directorate meeting where no doubt some potentially confidential information may or may not be discussed.
Yeah.
But
So,
it comes back to something you mentioned about accountability in terms of data storage, data usage, and so on between the developers, the AI system, your own trust process, and indeed individuals who maybe said a certain thing, and that might be recorded in the minutes of a meeting, for example.
the law as it stands is that you are not allowed to uh, transmit an individual's healthcare data outside of the borders of the UK without explicit consent from the patient and without a medical reason to do so. So with these AI systems, you have to make sure that the data centers that are powering them are some UK territory or Northern Ireland. That's okay as well. But it's really opaque because they can just tell you that, but how do you actually check that? We don't know, and I'm always skeptical because there aren't that many massive data centers in the UK. We're quite lacking in that regard compared to say America or China. But do check. Um, the other thing is that they had to be compliant with GDPR. So it's not just that the data can't be transmitted outside the UK; it has to be deleted within a specified time frame, and the patient has to have the right to opt out. And people always forget this. So if you're talking with a patient or about a patient, they technically have the right to opt out. No algorithmic processing of their data without their consent. Now, a lot of the consent is by kind of by just an understanding that the hospital is going to be using technology to store their records, and most patients don't care. but I guarantee there's going to be legal cases where data has leaked through the conversational AI systems. And it comes down to a matter of trust. If you know that, for example, the company of an ambient scribe is using ChatGPT as their backend, do you as a clinician trust OpenAI as a company that could potentially have access to your patient data? It's a question you have to seriously ask yourselves. So there is no direct answer to the question other than do your research, do your homework, be annoying to the venues, but to the vendors, ask them these questions. Where is the data? Can you prove that it's on data soil? Can you prove that it's deletable? How does the opt-out work if it's enacted? Ask them these annoying questions.
And that's great for industry, but another question's come in here about using Google Translate. It's difficult to ask Google, well, where's your data get processed? Is this just UK, GB&I? And is this safe for doing Google Translate in a patient with poor English? What are your thoughts?
So my understanding is that medical translation, when done by humans, has to be done by specially trained translators who are not just experts in their language, but they pass the test to show they understand medical language and can communicate medical things.
Services like Language Line, for example.
Exactly, and they are regulated. So I would suggest that there needs to be an AI developed that is regulated for medical translation. Now, in the absence of that, I would say that you use Google Translate or similar services at your own risk and at the patient's risk of data leakage. Would you be acting illegally? Probably not, because you are trying to do something helpful for the patients. You are trying to help them. You're trying to have a conversation with them across languages, which is obviously going to hopefully benefit. So you're probably acting morally, but I would say that if products become available where they are regulated as medical translating systems, then you probably should use those over and above Google Translate.
Super, that's great. And then another question in the chat about AI training courses. Anything specific to surgeons that you're aware of? Things that you'd recommend?
Not specific for surgeons. I mean, there's a whole bunch, and it depends if you want. I mean, if you want to learn how to build AI systems, there's loads of sort of machine learning, deep learning, and generative AI modeling courses out there. Uh, I think Open University, Stanford have a great online course. If you want to know about regulations, we did one with HDR UK. So there's a platform called Health Futures run by HDR UK. And we did a software as a medical device course. It's more aimed at software developers for people who want to build regulated software. Otherwise, I tell you who've been really good at this is the Royal College of Radiologists. They run training days for people on how to understand AI. And I've given sort of similar lectures to the radiology community. And they've been bombarded with AI for 20 years. So they're quite used to this now. And I think it's newer for the surgical community. So ask your radiology colleagues as well how they've handled it and where they got their training from as well. They are people and they like being contacted, trust me.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And I think actually, I haven't got my email open in front of me, but I think I got an email yesterday or today from the BOA actually. So for Murali Bat, I think the BOA are actually running a 2-day session if you're interested. So contact the BOA if you haven't got that email. Um, well, look, I mean, we've got a few minutes left. It would be remiss of us not to ask you some questions that AI told us to ask.
Okay.
So we asked an AI large language model what questions we should ask you, and it came up with a selection of approximately 50.
Right.
Um, so a couple of them sort of stood out for me. Let's pull that up. So there were some good ones. I mean, in the interest of self-preservation, one question was, do you anticipate AI systems eventually performing autonomous surgical tasks? So when do we run out of a job? When do we run out of road on this surgical track?
I mean, I can say currently, right now, categorically no. Right, today, no. It's going to take many, many, many years, and you're going to need to have very complex uh, vision systems that can ingest huge amounts of visual data and probably even sound, haptic feedback, everything. It's going to be a we're going to need to figure out these data requirements and the processing involved. I think there will be small baby steps over time towards that. So you'll start getting, well, we've already got robotic AI, you've got Da Vinci and all this kind of stuff. Um, it's going to be small baby steps as incremental improvements. But look at the radiologists. We were told 10 years ago, that none of you are going to have a job in 5 years. We're all still here and we're driving in our non-self-driving cars. So AI takes a lot longer to get there than Silicon Valley will tell you. I wouldn't worry. In fact, I would probably go as far to say anyone who's on this call and watching this afterwards, you're going to be fine. It's the generation after, in 50 years' time, who may have to worry.
And you mentioned robotics. Do you see any place for humanoid robots in the hospital? When we'll be walking down the corridor and seeing humanoid robots doing nursing tasks or
Yeah.
uh, scrub assist tasks or cleaning?
I'll give you an off kilter answer to that. Probably after we've got robots doing housework at home.
So
I,
proof of concept first
I
before
don't I
healthcare
don't
embraces it.
I don't see how we're going to allow robots to do surgery on humans before we have robots folding our laundry, which is a
Okay.
much less risky task, and robots can't do that yet. So
No, and one last question, if I might. There's a saying in orthopedics about the enemy of good.
yeah,
So when you're doing an operation, the enemy of good is the search for perfection.
yes,
So something that I might be doing during a surgical task and thinking, okay, well that's good. That's adequate. The way that software engineers and engineers in general are built, they will look for more binary perfection, more binary definitions of what constitutes good, and that will be quite a tight range, probably tighter than maybe the average human might be prepared to accept. So, is there a risk if surgeons are using surgical tools to evaluate what they're doing, that they are less able to get away from what is good in the search of perfection, and therefore some risk to patients of longer operations or redos? And I guess you, what are your thoughts in relation to how we assess what AI says we should be doing in these contexts?
it's a really good question, and there is no straight answer to it. I think it's just going to take time for the evidence to unfold as to how good these things are at doing those tasks and getting us towards good or perfection or wherever it is that we may be. I would say that it also adds a risk of de-skilling because if you're a surgeon and you start relying on the AI, I think, the whole skill of being a surgeon is you're using your intuition live. You're constantly making micro decisions as you operate. Um, and I think starting to rely on AI, I liken it to, I saw a great documentary about chess, and I play a lot of chess. There's AI has solved chess. You can't beat an AI chess engine. No one can, not even Magnus Carlsen, right? But people still play chess. But why do they do that? Because just the art of doing it is enjoyable and rewarding. And I don't think we should lose that, however good AI gets. I mean, yes, in 100 years in the future, if it's just demonstrable that robots, humanoids can operate far better than the top surgeon, then of course we should make that transition. But we're nowhere near that. And until then, medicine is an art and a science. And as far as I'm aware, AI is not very good at art. So let's maintain that humanity in it.
Well, that is very refreshing, refreshing to hear that the humans are still got a role to play and that surgeons are going to be around for a bit longer. So it is 8 o'clock, so we're going to wrap things up there. I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Dr. Hugh Harvey. It's been a fascinating tour through something of your world in the way that it pertains and relates to ours. So thank you very much for that. A couple of questions in the chat about finding presentations. So it will be accessible for OTSIS members. It may not be accessible in the public domain, but if it is, that would be linked to probably on LinkedIn. But the thing to do would be to copy through our administrator, James Rose, as per the links on registration for this session. So thanks again, Hugh, and thanks again, everyone, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and have a good rest of the week. Thanks very much.
Thank you.